Welcome to Popcorn Psychology, the podcast where we watch blockbuster movies and psychoanalyze them. My name is Brittany Brownfield, and I'm a child therapist, and I'm joined by...
Ben Stover, individual therapist.
Hannah Espinoza, marriage and family therapist.
We are all licensed clinical professional counselors, also known as therapists, who practice out of Chicago. Even though we are licensed mental health professionals, this podcast is purely for entertainment purposes and to fulfill our love of dissecting pop culture in all forms.
Please remember that even though we are all licensed therapists, we aren't your therapist.
If you are struggling with mental health symptoms, please find a local mental health provider.
One ring to rule them all. One ring to find them. One ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them. Welcome to our episode today. This is one of our most requested episodes of all. I'm already breaking Hannah and Brittany down, so if they start cracking up, this is good. But welcome to our episode. Today we're going to be doing one of the most requested things we've had. This is the Fellowship of the Ring, the start of the trilogy, and we are pleased to have the Southgates with us from the Southgate Media Group. If you guys want to go ahead and introduce yourselves.
I'm Martha Southgate. I don't know what you want.
That's not your podcast, folks.
Yeah, I am the co-owner of Southgate Media Group, and my podcast is Broken to Brave, which happens to be all about mental health.
Yeah, I was going to say, it fits the theme here.
Yeah.
People might be interested in it.
Mm-hmm.
They will definitely be interested in Broken to Brave.
Oh, am I supposed to explain it? Okay.
I would.
I am really, you think I never podcasted before.
What is happening? Okay. I think Lord of the Rings fried your brain.
I had a very trauma-filled life, and I turned 50 and fell apart because I had taken all my abusers with me and had sort of lost my whole adulthood. And so I took to my bed for a little while, and then I got out of bed and said, you know what, I'm going to challenge myself to do 50 brave things before I turn 51. And I'm going to turn this ship around. And then I did a podcast about it, describing each of those 50 things. And a lot of them are completely ridiculous because I couldn't do such simple things as make a phone call or pump my gas or anything like that. So I had to really dig deep to just take a step, you know. And then Rob and I do a companion podcast on Patreon, which gives the spouse's point of view of what it was like to go through all of that, and sort of what it took for me to, like, why I got there, like why that was such an important step. And we are on season 2, episode 43. So we've done like 100 almost of those.
Right, because there were 50 in the first season.
There you go. Maybe a few more. There might have been a few more, but anyway, yeah. So so that's what we do. That's what I do.
Thank you. Rob, if you want to take it away.
Sure. I am a co-owner of Southgate Media Group as well. I'm Rob Southgate. Clever how we named the company with the same name we had. It was ironic that it happened that way, but it just worked out. Let's see. I am yes, I'm a podcaster. Yes, I've been on tons and tons of podcasts. I've executive produced tons and tons of podcasts. We have made some changes. So now I've really stepped into a different role where I am on Broken to Brave, which is literally the best thing I've ever been on. It's amazing. So please check it out. It really, I find it very moving, very funny, and a lot of fun to do and very interesting. I have transitioned into being a podcast marketing consultant. So basically I work with teams that are experienced podcasters, such as Popcorn Psychology. We do consulting on your marketing, social media marketing, digital marketing. I'm a digital marketing professor. I think I can help. So I've really transitioned into that, even though we do still have Southgate Media Group. And we did just launch a new property with that called Short Heads, where we're doing short reviews of short films and film festivals. And it's just It just started this week, and it's like we're ignited. We can't stop talking about it. It's awesome. So there you go. You can find all that by following me. That's probably the easiest way, or finding Southgate Media Group. And I'm sure we'll have a chance to put some of that social media stuff out there later or in the show notes.
Yeah.
We absolutely will. And Rob can absolutely help you. For those of you that don't know, Rob snatched us up and brought us onto one of their live podcast marathons in our first season, I think, and was one of the first people who ever listened to us and went, hey, this show is cool. And that gave us a huge, huge boost of confidence. And then a lot of the tips and tricks that Rob has given us have accelerated our growth. So I would encourage you all to look up Rob and be sure to check him out and ask him for help, because he absolutely can help you.
I totally appreciate that plug. Hey, one more quick thing. I promise I won't make it Plug City. We do have volume 2 of Pod Life coming out, which is our book where we tell podcaster stories, or actually they tell their own stories and we collect them. And I believe there may be some popcorn psychology in this volume.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we can admit, yeah, you guys are in it. So stay tuned for that as well. Watch. I'm sure you guys will put stuff out about it, and we'll put it out too. But it's Pod Life Volume 2, and we're going to repackage Volume 1, and it's going to be freaking awesome. And your story is great, by the way. Okay, I'm done plugging.
All right, so now Molly, our last guest of the day, but not the least.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Molly Southgate. I've listened to Popcorn Psychology forever. I have my own podcast that actually everyone on this episode has been on, called Read
true.
Between the Lines. And it's a book podcast where now I primarily interview authors about their upcoming novels. And that show's just a lot of fun. I talk all about like writing and books and just the process of reading in general. And yeah, so that's really exciting. I'm also an actress, and I've got a food blog that I don't post on called What's Molly Making? And I am a big fan of Lord of the Rings. So I'm excited to be on today. As of today, I would call myself a big fan, because now that I've rewatched it.
That's great. I think, there's an excuse for not posting on a blog. It says, what's Molly making today? It is movies.
Yes.
Or plays or being a professional actress. So Molly is making people have emotions. So that's awesome.
Yes, thank you.
Never sell yourself short when you're with some therapists.
True.
Yes, I'll have to rename it. Molly, what's Molly making? Emotions.
There you go.
She's also only 14, and she's studying very hard, and she pushes herself very, very hard. And so, yes, I always tell her, it's okay to just be a kid. It's okay to slow down, So, yeah, she does tend to think that she's not producing enough. Yeah.
But she you think about her show. She has to read a book for every one of these episodes.
Has this become a compliment, city for me? It's awesome.
Seriously.
I should come on here more often.
That's true. We just have to watch a movie.
She had to read 50 books last year just for her show.
Wow.
I, on the other hand, have gotten through 4 chapters of Shannara in the last year. So thank you.
And I could barely do an intro for myself. So I think you're doing pretty well. Yeah.
4 chapters of Shannara is the length of 50 books. So I've seen how big those are.
Okay.
All right. So now that we know where we can find you guys and why we would have you on this show, because #you're awesome, is because today we wanted to get a collection of different opinions on it, have a fellowship of our own to discuss this massive movie. And, I know we typically give you a quick rundown of the plot. I feel like if I need to give you a rundown of the plot of The Lord of the Rings, you're in the wrong place. So I'm going to go ahead and start strong with that.
You guys yelled at me when I said that
I can give my best shot. So a long time ago, these people made these rings, and there was a lot of them, and they went to different kinds of people, like humans and elves and trolls and dwarfs and hobbits and stuff, I think.
So
and then there was a big war. And then there was like one ring that's like daddy ring. And everyone, when they see that ring, is like, mommy likey, I want that ring. And it makes people like a little like, oh, in their brains. And maybe it'll make you into like a little goblin creature if you have it for too long.
Literally,
and
none
so
of those
now
things are
the
true.
point of this movie is that they're trying to throw that ring into a volcano.
Yes.
But it's really
watching
hard to
Rob's
do. And
nerd
everyone is
soul
rolling. Everyone's rolling their R's so hard. I do know it's
Yes, she kept
Mordor.
saying that during the movie. I don't
What
see it.
is up with that?
Mordor.
Like I said the same thing. I'm like, is it Moldor? What are
They're
they
just
saying?
British.
Is it Moldor?
showing
Like
off.
X-Files? Are we?
Tolkien invented his own languages for this book. He was a professor of many things, but he invented several of these languages. He created a full language structure and grammar and rules, all of it. For his. So Mordor being its own word and pronounced its own way is because it's its own language.
Listen, it's a weird flex, but okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
So today,
I'm sorry, I was watching Rob's nerd soul die inside of him while you were explaining that movie.
I'm just stuck on the fact that most of what you said was the backstory that happens in the first like minute of the movie, and then you jump to the third movie where they throw the ring in. Spoiler.
Well, I said that's the goal. The goal is to throw the ring into a volcano.
A volcano, yeah. And
But there's like
I was-
orcs and hot guys with swords and long hair.
who look the same. So I
Wait,
couldn't
are we
tell
talking about
apart.
Dude, Where's My Car?
Ugh, no, bro.
Never.
So, with this beautiful movie that I just described, we're going to be talking about shame and identity, dissociation, like the different ways and kinds that can occur, the family dynamics / trauma bonds shown within the fellowship, as well as our final thoughts and things of that nature. So, so let's jump into it. So shame and identity was the theme that popped out the most to me as watching this movie with therapist's eyes. I think that seemed like the most salient feeling or like a thing that came up for me. A lot of like, I'm right off the gate, almost just shame as is kind of rooted in the ring and how it affects people. Like right away, I noticed even with Gandalf, who's like the most, it seems to be portrayed as the most like untouchable force. He has to create boundaries right away with this ring. Like I can't really touch it. It has to be in an envelope. I don't really want to talk about why I can't be around it. There's just so much shame, it seems like, around the way that the ring makes all the characters feel, and I was noticing how it impacted the way that they are like honest with each other, to be frank.
I have a question about that. When you talked about the ring or Gandalf specifically, I think at the beginning when he was setting those boundaries, I don't know if that was necessarily shame as much as he was really trying to figure out if this was what he thought it was. And if it was, he knew it was dangerous. But why tell everybody what this is? I don't think that was shame. But I think after that point with everybody else, absolutely. I think Gandalf, I think it was a slightly different motivation. I think he was being protective and set boundaries to be protective because he is the daddy of the group.
He is.
Yeah, he is. Well, and I feel like you're right in terms of basically he figures out as much as he can and then leaves right away so he can go learn more about it immediately. Like he has to go someplace to get more information. So yeah, I feel like it makes sense in terms of Gandalf for that piece for sure, that it kind of was everybody else. But I think what were we going to say, Ben? Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. You finish your thought. Mine will come back.
I'm good.
Oh, okay. So there is shame in Gandalf, though, in realizing that the leader of his order, Saruman, the person he trusted most, the person he trusted with this information, that has been betraying him and everything he believed in the whole time. And we have to see Gandalf reckon with that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that he didn't recognize that was definitely a big shame moment. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Which I think is kind of like the second half of this topic, which is the identity piece. And I think we see that a lot in this movie where people, like you were just saying, Ben, people have really close relationships to others and really shape their identities like we all do around a relationship that they're in, and the shame that can come up from realizing that the person you feel connected to isn't honest or isn't who you thought they were. We see that, like you just said, with Gandalf and Saruman. We see that with like Frodo and Bilbo. We see that with Aragorn and his family line. You know, it comes up a lot in this movie of, I really thought I knew who I was, and not just who I was, but who the people around me were. And then feeling such deep, like life altering shame around that changing.
We see it with Merry and Pippin as well, and understanding just how absolutely sheltered they are and ill-equipped to be on this journey they are. Like them lighting the fire and just totally on the watchtower and drawing the Nazgul to them, as well as being just completely unaware of how much trouble they're in. Mm-hmm. And how ill-equipped they are to survive this world, and that they're a liability to the party because of how unaware they are and how sheltered they've been.
Mm-hmm. And we definitely see that with Sam too, and like what you were saying earlier about how he's like really putting his whole identity around protecting Frodo during this, and like even though he does not know what he's doing. But he's still the one like putting himself into that protector position.
Yes.
Even though he's just as ill-equipped.
Mm-hmm.
But technically Gandalf put him in that position. And so he felt obligated. And then the whole time he kept saying, I was told that like, this was my order. Like, you know, so
true.
Once again, he took that on as his identity, but it wasn't his choice. You know, he didn't feel it was a choice. And I don't know that he would have made that choice for himself, just like Frodo might not have made that choice for himself if his uncle hadn't gotten the ring to begin with, you know, like they were thrust into roles.
Mm-hmm.
They were very thrust into roles and shoved into this world that, you know, it's very clear that Bilbo didn't tell Frodo the whole story, which never happens. People that talk about adventures never talk about the bad parts. Mm-hmm. I think there's an interesting phenomenon where like people who survived Vietnam and were men of a certain generation latched on to Rambo, but can't watch The Deer Hunter.
Right.
Because it's too realistic.
Because it's too real. And one paints a picture in a way that there's power being taken back, and the trauma that happened is then translated into power over the situation and power over the man that destroyed so much. And then The Deer Hunter is the more accurate look at what they went through, what happened, how bad it really was. And I think Bilbo is guilty of the same thing with telling Frodo the stories of what he went through without telling about how scary it was. Mm-hmm. Like we won versus these trolls, and later we see those trolls. One of the scenes where Strider gives them all swords is literally in the shadow of those trolls that Bilbo froze. And I have seen this movie like 100 times, and I literally just caught that this time.
Really?
Yeah.
Which it was funny because I was waiting for it when it came up. I'm like, trolls. I didn't say anything because they haven't seen or read. Well, Molly has read The Hobbit.
No, I've read part of The Hobbit, and I've seen the movie. They haven't
seen the other movie. You saw the movie?
I saw The Hobbit.
All the movies?
I've seen what?
There's 3.
I think I saw one, and then I saw the weird animated cartoon.
How dare you?
Oh, mm-hmm.
The weird animated cartoon is amazing.
Yeah,
it was, but it was still weird, and it was still animated.
I think going back to what you were saying, Ben, actually one of my notes that I wrote down was like the desire for adventure, like the concept of the grass is greener on the other side. I think that exactly what you were saying with how Bilbo represented his adventure is this idea of there's something better out there and there's a bigger world. And then kind of the, not even necessarily like shame, but the identity crisis that can come from going out there and getting the thing that you thought was greener and then realizing that it's not what you expected, or feeling tricked, and realizing that it's not for you. I mean, the amount of times Frodo says in this movie, like, I wish the ring had never found me, of this idea of like also feeling like it's your fault because you, I don't know, manifested it or something, that like I brought this on myself. And so I think with Frodo, you definitely, and I think that's also part of why he wants to go on his own towards the end, is I wanted this ish. I know you guys could probably argue with me, but in my reading of it, my watching of it as someone totally detached, is like, I wanted this and I got my friends in the mix. And even though it was kind of also given to me as a quest, it's not what I thought it would be. It's not what I was told it would be. Cause I think there's also, like we were all already referenced, the shame or the identity shame of like, I looked up to this role model and they didn't tell me the truth.
Okay. Can I just want to, I agree with you on so many levels there. The one part though, is that I feel like Frodo went off on his own, was after Gandalf died. Yeah. I don't know if he's dead. I haven't seen that. Sure. But like when,
spoiler alert,
and so I feel like Gandalf set him up sort of, because Gandalf was scared and didn't want to make the decision of whether or not we're going into the mines. And so he's like, let's let the one with the ring decide. And I feel like he totally set him up because he didn't know what they were going to get into. And then here he lost his mentor and his hero, and people were getting hurt, and it was terrifying and horrifying. And he left, he's like, I'm done. I feel like he made that decision after his choice caused all of this pain and destruction. And I feel like, if I were Frodo, I would have felt very set up by my mentor. Because it's like, how could you let me walk into that and now you're gone? And I would have felt very betrayed, personally.
And I think he was lashing out. I think he was lashing out very much like when he chose to leave and was trying to make it so that way Samwise couldn't go with him. I think it was very much from a place of guilt. And circling back to what we were saying about the shame, where it's like, oh no, I let these people get hurt. And I let Gandalf die and all of this happen because I'm not sure if Frodo was thinking that he got set up too. We don't know. But I think that's really interesting, Mom, what you were saying about that.
Brittany, I think, you were questioning whether we were going to think that Frodo wanted this in some part of him. I absolutely agree that he did want part of this because he looked up to Bilbo so much. Bilbo had this grand adventure. And even though he was like, I'm not doing this, inside he's going, oh, snap, this is my chance. And then when Sam comes, he doesn't say like, no, Sam, absolutely not. Yeah. No, it's like, oh, my buddy's going with me, road trip. And the other guys are going to get food. Awesome. You know what? I wanted to bring up one other thing, and I don't want to sidetrack us too much, but back when you were talking about the shame and identity from family and the mix there, there were two characters, and I don't know how much this comes out in the movie, but in the book, it absolutely does. And I think it may come out later, there is a very deep story between Arwen and Elrond, the elves, because her father and she is breaking away from the elves to be with this human. And there's this break between the two. And there's a lot there. And you kind of get a glimpse in this movie of his backstory. And I was telling Martha and Molly when we were watching it, I said, his backstory is so complex. Tolkien had to write the Silmarillion to try to explain what the hell his backstory is and why there's all this that plays into how Arwen acts and is now. So I think you're spot on when you start breaking it down. Tolkien had to be looking at these things and saying, I've got these things that they have to keep dealing with generation after generation after generation. Where is the shame? Where are they hiding? And all that. And that was one that I don't know if it came across in the movie so much, but it's one whenever I watch the movie, I think about.
Yeah. Well, and you had brought up, Rob, before we started recording, how with Aragorn, how that's really presented is he is an interesting demonstration of how shame can come up, which is he's living life under an alias, and he's hiding from his ancestral line, and and he's an interesting example of, which I do see in real life, of someone in my family, usually a direct descendant, usually parents, when I talk to people IRL about this stuff, was a quote unquote bad person because they did this, that, and the other. And we struggle as human beings to not take on the shame of I'm going to use the word ancestors, which sounds more like Lord of the Ring-ish, but I mean of our family, and with him so much that he is like hiding who he is totally. And he is like, correct me if I'm wrong, like a few generations removed, right, from Isildur. Oh God.
Isildur. You're okay.
I almost had it. I'm surprised that came up in my brain. Mm-hmm. But I think that's something I see, like I said, in real life, of people feeling like, well, my mom was like this, so I'm going to be like this, or my parents did this, so I'm going to do this. So I'm like, it's this idea of like bad blood that, even though I think intellectually we can recognize that for how untrue that is, but I think emotionally we really struggle to not connect with that because, and it's a little far away from the Aragorn thing, but maybe not, I don't know, but especially if we like look like our parents, or if we have some shared characteristics of our family, which we probably would because genetics, we
like
then
the same name or something.
Yeah, that would be me. I have the same name.
Yeah. So we do this thing where we conflate it. And we get really all or nothing in our thinking. It's catastrophizing, where we're like, well, I'm going to be just like them, or I'm going to do this and do that, totally ignoring the fact that there's that interplay of nature and nurture. And sometimes we actually, we talk about like post-traumatic growth and things like that, but sometimes when we go through those situations and we know enough about our ancestry, we can make active decisions to go the other direction. And honestly, sometimes come out better, because that's glib, and that, people shouldn't have to go through hard things to be, to grow. But I think we can be more cognizant and mindful, I guess is what I mean, to and get even to maybe a more advanced place in our growth than if maybe that stuff hadn't happened, because we're being so intentional. And so I think with Aragorn, we kind of almost see that, like he's almost so good because he's trying to fight off, it seems like, this concern he has about like inherited badness.
It was part of the shame and why he rejects it, and why he rejects his identity. And you're right there. And we see that a lot of that starts to play out more when again, this is in the extended edition. Unfortunately, they cut this scene, but when he's talking to Éowyn in the Two Towers, there's a whole scene where he talks about him being 87 years old. And how much he's seen, that he rode with her grandfather into battle. And he's seen so much. He's not only carrying with him the shame and guilt and the identity he's taken on from being Isildur's heir, but he's also taking on all of the things that he's had to do to survive the wars, and why he's become a ranger, and that part of his life he spent away from his people and with these immortal, perfect beings, the elves. That he's been able to escape that and grow up in Rivendell, which is a paradise-like state. And in between, and the elves are leaving this world. That's another, scene that gets deleted from this movie, is watching the elves leave. The whole theme of this.
He mentions it, but you don't see it.
Right. You don't see it. And not until you watch the extended do you see the leaves, or the elves leaving. And so much of this movie is about the time passing, the era of the elves being the supreme beings ending, and men having to step up into the world. And that theme of shame versus identity starts to really crack through the seams of the movie at that point, because you realize from one of the lines that Frodo has when he meets Bilbo in Rivendell is that, I set out on my own adventure, but mine went disastrously. Really, and then you see Bilbo break when they have that conversation, because the reality of Bilbo's journey is theirs went really poorly too. They got into hot water immediately.
Well, and
He
didn't
know that story.
Yeah, exactly. And how that story is actually a lot more similar to what Frodo experiences, but because his uncle doesn't share that with him, he doesn't know that.
No, because
it might have saved him a little bit of pain if he had been honest about his experiences. Yeah.
Which is what I
Instead
feel
of
like
building his own hero's journey, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Which is what I feel like which is part of why the shame piece was something that me and Brittany were talking about it when we were watching the film to begin with, is this kind of piece of being able to share even a little bit about any of these topics can help shift the idea of kind of, especially when we talking about or we're not talking about that yet though, are we?
Go with your idea, Hannah. Go with it. Go with it. Don't lose it. Go.
When we talk about intergenerational trauma, what we're talking about is a lot of times the intergenerational trauma in a family, a lot of times it's kept a secret. Mm-hmm. Either it's kept a secret. Sometimes it's not kept a secret from everyone. Sometimes it's only maybe the males in the family or the women in the family. Like it's where, and that becomes a part of how the trauma continues to affect the generations down throughout the family, is that it's kept a secret. And because it's kept a secret, no one is allowed to experience any growth or insight because there is a secret and nobody has all the pieces. And this is kind of, and that when we don't have all the pieces, what do? We make our own narrative in order to help understand what we are experiencing around us. And that narrative, especially depending on how old you are. So I feel like one of the things, so I actually watched the extended versions. You guys keep bringing it up. And now I feel like I'm in the club of knowing what the extended versions are.
Yes.
But I watched the extended versions today. And I remember there is a scene where Aragorn is talking about being like a little boy and being at Rivendell, and how that would be such a different experience of being in a group of people who all kind of know the intensity around him being Isildur's heir, but like him, like creating narratives for himself as a kid, because some of these things probably weren't clearly described to him. And that's a lot of times what kids in families of trauma end up doing. And the younger you are, the more kind of fantastical conclusion you can come to. And so I don't know if that's what we were talking about, but that's where I went with it.
Well,
and Aragorn is faced with that sword, right? He grows up being shown that sword that was used to cut the ring, and then the failure. So he is probably intimately familiar with that story.
Go ahead, Martha.
Well, I was just going to say back to what you were saying, that where you'll create your own, and so often people will make it as if they were responsible. Like, yeah. And so it's not like, oh, I am creating this narrative and this fantasy, and it was that guy it's like we all internalize, and then it's like, I must be horrible because, this happened to me, or this happened in my family. And so I had to have caused that. Like I had to,
because
magical thinking.
Well, and also because part of that also is no one else around you is telling you anything. So you also aren't getting the input of anyone else. So therefore, again, especially if we think about being a kid and how they're so egocentric, because that is developmentally where they are egocentric, that the story is going to be about me. The story is going to be about me and my effect and how I must be bad because these things happen and therefore I'm inherently bad, and making that connection, and that they don't have other people's input on it. And that it isn't even, and that the other piece of this, it's also not something that is conscious. Yeah. Like 5-year-old kids who are experiencing trauma aren't like telling somebody how they're making up a story about how a monster is hurting them. Like that's not how this happens. This is a response that the body and the brain has of, I need to make sense of what I'm experiencing. And this is the only framework that I can do that with.
Well, and when you have the parent, if the parent or somebody that's responsible for you or supposed to be responsible for you is the one causing it and perpetuating, causing the thing. A lot of times that becomes then, but I need them to survive. So it can't be them. I can't have it be them. So I better make it, so it's not even like you're doing it consciously, but it's this absolute fear of, just like I think Frodo had that with Gandalf, where it was like, as soon as Gandalf was gone, he's like, oh my God, now what do I do? Like, I can't do this by myself. And I needed him. And now I caused this. And now look at me, now I'm screwed. You know what I mean? But like, it's.
Well, and think about it. That scene, I mean, all that stuff happens after he sees Bilbo for the second time. And he sees what happens when Bilbo tries to go for that ring. And all of a sudden, it's like this fun adventure. All of a sudden, oh, crap. Look what it did to Bilbo. And look who Bilbo is. I saw his mask slip, even though in reality, he's not that all the time. It's not like his mask actually slipped. But to Frodo, I'm sure he interpreted it that way. Then the next thing is the fellowship thing where he's like, I'm not, I'm going to give this up. And then all of a sudden, he's like, I have to do this. Gandalf goes, now it's like, all of this is my fault. All of this because I wanted to have the adventure like Bilbo, my great uncle, who I now see as potentially not such a great guy.
And how I feel like how Gandalf internalizes it in terms of these are some of his favorite people. Yeah. These are his cherished people that help him have hope about the world in general. And so that's the piece. I think that's the shame for him of like, now these people that I just love and adore they're having to risk everything and they're having to do all of these things that I never wanted anyone. I mean, I never wanted anyone to have to do, of course, but not the people that I care about and love the most kind of, and they help me remember what humanity is like. So I think, again, just kind of tying that into the piece of Gandalf and how he feels about the hobbits as well.
Well, I think that the telling moment for that is the scene that you mentioned earlier when Gandalf won't decide if they're going to go over the mountain or through the mountain, and he has Frodo do it. But I don't think it was as simple as I'm afraid to make the decision. I think it was that same thing. We're screwed either way.
Yeah.
If I make the decision, I'm not serving you guys well, but if I have you make the decision and it turns out okay, I've bolstered you guys. Do you know what I mean? Like there is potentially not a lot of shame there as much as there's, I know we're screwed. Either way, we could die because he knows that in those mountains, there's something much worse. But when that snow is falling, he knows they're also screwed. I mean, he tried his magic and man, they almost died.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Molly, I cut you off.
Yeah. Go ahead, Molly.
No, it's fine. I was just going to say, I think that when watching it, something that really stood out to me was how Gandalf is just trying to protect them throughout the entire movie, even if there are times where it doesn't go right or where he's pushing these responsibilities onto Frodo. I felt like the root of all of his actions were always trying to protect people.
Yeah.
And especially like there's one scene, and I do not remember this character's name at all, but it's the elf
Sing
guy.
it to me, sister.
Legolas?
No, the other elf.
The
dark
red-haired one? The red-haired one?
Elrond, the dad of Arwen.
Hugo Weaving?
That one.
The Matrix?
That guy.
Yeah.
Well, when Gandalf is talking to him and he says, he's like, we put too much pressure on Frodo and he's trying to back out of this whole mission. I think that was really powerful how he did that, because a lot of times in these sort of fantasy series, you see it, Harry Potter, and they just keep going. And it's like, no, we have to stay true to the quest. And these like sort of wizard-like characters a lot of times don't have that self-awareness. And that was something that kind of drew me in more and like almost made it more magical watching it, seeing and more real, like seeing it be this guilt over what he had done and trying to go back.
Well, Molly, wait till you see the other ones and you watch the other Hobbit movies, because it gets even better with Gandalf.
Well, I will say what kind of sparked for me when you were saying that, Molly, which is a great point, is when we're put in impossible situations where we have to make decisions that aren't exactly rooted in our values, or where we have to prioritize our values. I think one thing I wrote about Sam, actually, and kind of you reminded me of that, Rob, when you brought Sam up, is he's my all-time favorite. And he is, I feel like, this is my opinion, he's the most value-driven character of all. Like he is working from a place of value that I think is why we feel attracted to him as a character, and why I think he kind of holds on to himself the best. And when I talk about values in the sense of therapy, it's about like, do we value honesty? Do we value loyalty? Do we value money? Like it could be for friendships, like it can be whatever it means to you. And there's no like right or wrong answer to what your value is. You just have to be cognizant of what your value is for you, and if you feel good living towards those values or not. And I think what is hard about the situation of this movie, and you could argue like Harry Potter is very similar, is that characters are having to do their best and make on the fly decisions, so they don't have the option to live the truest of their values, or their values are always being questioned or challenged. Like I would say a good example of that is I think Boromir, is that Sean Bean's character?
Yes.
Yes. Got 2 for 2. And you can see his struggle really deeply of wanting to be a valiant sort of like knight-like character and take care of the hobbits and teach them and protect them, and how he struggles to live according to his values because of the situation that they're in. Because I think also what we've kind of touched upon, but not really, is there's an element in this movie, The Ring, that is making everyone question themselves. Like there's this variable that is fucking with people's heads. It's almost like if you made everyone shoot up with heroin at the beginning of this movie and then kept throwing around a dime bag of heroin the whole time. And people, like in real life, people have varied levels of addictive personalities. There are certain drugs like heroin that you'll get addicted to no matter what. But I think this movie also kind of made me think of the shame of addiction that addiction can bring up, and also how when we are in the thrall of something, that questions our values or makes us act outside of our values. There is so much shame that comes after the fact. And also when we do have a variable like that in play, we do act out of character. That's kind of it shifts part of the shame and identity is when we are in the thrall of an addiction or something along those lines, is we don't act like ourselves. We struggle with our identity. We get misaligned with our values. We treat people in a way that we don't connect with value wise. And so I think this movie actually felt like a kind of a beautiful metaphor to me, or analogy of like addiction or temptation, and how it makes us act outside of ourselves. And just like I said, brings up this deep shame that we see, I think, most potently with Boromir, but I think also we see with Bilbo, like the way that he shifts. It's like, if we want to keep the analogy going or the metaphor in the beginning, it's like if he'd had a secret addiction his whole life that he's been keeping under wraps, and then Gandalf comes and he's like, I need you to give me your stash. And he's like, you can go fuck yourself. And that shift is what you kind of see when you are trying to support someone who isn't quite at the place yet where they're ready to let go of their addiction, or they're just in it. They're like deep in it. Cause I think with Bilbo, you do see that he wants to, I think, I'm making an assumption. I think he wants to get to the other side of it, but he's not quite ready at that conversation to do the work. He gets there like pretty quickly, but I don't know. You guys can take it from there. But I don't think
that was much of an assumption. I think that what we saw at the beginning when he was going to disappear and his whole plan was to give up the ring and everything, I think that he was trying to get on the other side.
Yeah.
Of it. And he probably figured, hey, I'm going to live this nice long life without it by moving and living with the elves, which we didn't know he was doing, but it was his plan. So I think you're right. I think he was going to live with the elves to live a life without this pull of addiction that he was experiencing from the ring. And then ultimately that pull of addiction was pulling on him, in the final moments. And he did age when he was with the elves, but I have a feeling he thought he wouldn't.
He did. I mean, he goes through that speech where he said he wanted to go and walk the paths of Mirkwood again and see the Misty Mountains again and visit the men at Rivertown. He wanted to do all those things.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And he definitely was under the assumption that he would be able to do so and that his aging would continue to be suspended.
Right.
Mm-hmm. That he would be able to relive his glory days. But then when he stepped outside of the power of the ring, then his age catches up with him quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Arthur, that's what's happened to me. I didn't want to say anything, but I no longer have a ring in my pocket. And frankly, the gray and the bald spot are just racing in at this point.
Well, your timing's bad because I'm going backwards.
I know.
You guys are time traveler wifing it over there.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
But I think the thing that I want to touch on is we've covered all of the shame really well, but not the identity components that we see evolve in particularly the last 20 minutes of this film, is that all of the struggles with the identities that are changing due to the situation,
Mm-hmm.
they all have to evolve into what they're going to become. And they have to recognize, and they all struggle with it. Each one of them struggles with it in their own way, that they have to give up who they are trying to be. They have to give up who they were in the past version of their life based on the past reality that they assumed existed in order to embrace who they must become to survive now.
Mm-hmm.
Gandalf does it first. Spoiler alert, Gandalf falls down that pit and fights the Balrog and wins and becomes a transcended version of himself, Gandalf the White,
But
in
also,
the next movie. But when we see that Gandalf knows this, the audience doesn't know this, the party doesn't know this. Gandalf will know that he's probably not going to die, but something will happen. In this version, Gandalf the Grey will cease to exist. But Gandalf the Grey was not the right fit for this world anymore. Gandalf the Grey was outmatched by Saruman the White.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And Gandalf was no longer going to be of use because he couldn't serve Saruman as the Grey Wizard. He had to become his own. And then we see each successive character go through their own struggle. Gimli and Legolas need to let go of their hatred of each other for being an elf and a dwarf and assume the roles of a party together. Boromir deals with the shame of trying to take that ring and holding Gondor and the mission of Gondor above everyone else. And in his dying breaths, he puts the hobbits and the fellowship in the forefront of his mind and dies defending that. Then Aragorn takes Boromir's bracers and puts those on, embracing his identity after Boromir tells him he's his king. We see Aragorn stop fighting that identity of Strider and become Aragorn in that moment and then take leadership. And then we see Frodo and Sam both take this role of, no one else can take this burden on but us. They can't hold it. Frodo watches everyone around him except Sam fall to the pressures of that ring. He watches everyone who matters to him, everyone he encounters, including Galadriel, who's essentially a god, start to crumble under the power of the ring until she realizes that this ring is more powerful than her and her time to withdraw is over. She has to withdraw too. So he's seeing a god announce that she's leaving the world because she can't contend with this power either. And we see all of these people have to embrace this identity. And that's when their hero's journey really starts, when they leave behind these past identities. And then Merry and Pippin stop being boneheads and start being the party's rogues, basically.
That's what I'll say. Hey, I'm going to jump in right here as someone who is a total outsider. I wrote my notes that it's amazing how brave these hobbits are. Okay. They're like, they're outside of everything they know and they're fighting and they're throwing those swords around. They're being like baddies. Okay. And I know that they're boneheads because they just want to get second breakfast or 11 C's or whatever, because they got the munchies all day from smoking on that pipe. But they are like, they're more than their best.
Well, and the way they evolved throughout the series is amazing. You know where the transition was, though, was in the mines. up to that point, even when he knocked over the thing and he goes fool overtook because he knocked the thing down the well, they were still boneheads. But it was kind of starting to change. But when the troll came in, they jumped right on his back and were stabbing him like first.
Yeah.
That was
Sneak
when
attack.
they finally went, you know what? We're in.
Right.
And from then on, they are in. 1 minute before that, bonehead.
Well, then that they can have an impact.
Yeah, absolutely.
They can do something different. They don't have to, they don't have to wait for another chance to be courageous or brave. They have it right now in this moment. They don't have to wait anymore to do something like that.
But if you think about what happens to Pip by the end of this series,
Yeah.
I mean, come on. They were stealing carrots at the beginning, and that was like as daring as they got. And by the end, I mean, he's a soldier. I mean, wow.
Yeah, absolutely.
Spoiler.
Well, and you guys were talking like some more about like how they kind of matured in the minds. And I think that all of the characters had their own like almost like mini arcs, or at least resolutions to part of their arcs well in the minds. And I know that we were going to talk about trauma bonding, but I think that was something really big there, that they all went through this. That was like the first real fight they had all together, like something that every single one of them could have died. And it's really interesting to see how that changed everyone. And then following that immediatly with Gandalf's death, which really changed everyone.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because they all.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I'll be really quick, Martha. Then you can go. And also how, even though each one of them had a different relationship with Gandalf, like that they all felt his loss in a very similar way, which is to see someone else's, mortality in front of you, to have that happen. And so, yeah, I think which I think is interesting too, that they all are so comfortable with experiencing those feelings around each other, and B, that it seems to hit them all at the same level, which we almost never see, especially with characters who are mostly male presenting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when I was going to say what Molly had said was, she had said that was the first time they had to, that they kind of fought the same thing, when a lot of times with the other challenges they had, they could still be individual and still have their own agendas and still do this. And this was like that one moment where it was like, if we don't work together, no one is walking out of here. And so they didn't have a choice, and so that was the first time where there was no room for a single one of them to go, yeah, I'm going to just be over here, like I'm doing my own thing, or, I don't care if this thing wins or whatever, like it was. And so I think that is so powerful when you don't have a choice, and then it changes the dynamic really fast.
Well, and if you think about it, the scene literally just before this, when they were coming in, they were attacked by that sea creature. And if you watch that scene, the heroes step up and start fighting and chopping things, and the hobbits run away, and like they're not bonded together yet. When they're inside, they're still, like you said, boneheads. And then everything changes, and they're forced into this. And from then on, even though arguably it was right at this point that the fellowship breaks, when Gandalf dies, it changed the dynamic and broke the fellowship, even though it doesn't technically happen till later. So we had this like brief moment of like, this is what it is. This is what Elrond was talking about. This is the fellowship that's going to get us to the end. And oh no, he's dead. Now what do we do?
But isn't that so typical of grief?
Yes.
The therapist could speak to this, but isn't that grief often fractures, right? Like you go, even the strongest of relationships can fracture under grief.
When the patriarch or the matriarch dies, the makeup of the family always goes through a shift. Because someone else must step into that. And often what happens is a fracturing where families break off into the members of the old family, where their attachment to the matriarch or patriarch, and Hannah can probably say more on this because this is her realm, but the matriarch or the patriarch dies, And then the other family members break off and become the leaders of their own families. And that's exactly what we see in this movie. They break off. Merry and Pippin become their own thing. Frodo and Sam become their own thing. Aragorn, Gimli, and Legolas become their own thing. We see 3 separate branches happen.
Yeah.
And it is something that happens in families. And then people have to deal with the shame and the guilt and the grief of the loss and their relationship with that person and what they learn later and the secrets, etc., as they move through their grief process. And we see that all happen really quick in this movie.
Especially if the person who died is the one holding the group together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I would argue that Aragorn really steps into almost like the patriarch position of the whole group. Because like, as you can see, like after Gandalf dies, he's forming these different bonds with every single member and like very much steps into a protector position that we don't really see any of the other characters going into. And I think that also has something to do with him being the heir and kind of finally accepting that.
Mm-hmm. I agree. So I think with us hammering down this road, we're leading into essentially where the next topic I wanted to go was, and I wanted to touch on that because I don't think it'll be a long section, but talking about the dissociation that we see. Mm-hmm. And dissociation on our show, we've talked about extensively due to all of our backgrounds and my specialization in trauma, and the dissociation has essentially become a bad word, but we forget that dissociation serves both positive and negative functions, and that there are both good types of dissociation and bad, or less than ideal. And when I talk about good dissociation, I'm going to talk about a concept that I don't think I've talked about on the show at all, which is flow. And for those of you that aren't familiar with the concept of flow is that feeling when you are in the zone. You don't know exactly what you're doing, how you did it, how you got there, but you did. And it could be when you're playing the guitar solo and you just start tearing notes apart and just shred, or when you're acting and something clicks to you and you ad-lib the most perfect line ever, such as "I love you, I know." You just get so in the zone of what you're doing that you lose connection with space and time and become only that function of yourself. And that's what flow is. And flow is a dissociative state. You are leaving behind other parts of your personality to take advantage of the part of you that is on right now and is owning this moment. And we see that happen all over this film. And another thing that happens that is a positive side of dissociation is that when you must access the collective unconscious, you must access the knowledge that is stored in your genes, the stories that exist across cultures, across generations, across the human experience are all stored in our genes. It's why every one of us could write a story right now that contains a hero, a bad guy, a wise old man, a villain, a shadow of ourselves. We could all write any of these stories that contains the archetypes. And which means we all have access to these. These stories exist, which means these stories, these characters and these stories are universal. And sometimes we have to access them. And sometimes you have to leave behind your conscious self and what you know about who I am in this world in order to access an archetypal version of yourself that exists in your collective unconscious. And again, we see that in this story over and over again, where these characters get exposed to extraordinary circumstances where the version of them for Sam, the version of Sam that's a gardener can't survive this world. The version of Merry and Pippin that steal groceries and smoke weed all day can't survive this world. And they have to transcend that identity and take on roles that they've only heard about in stories. Mm-hmm. But because these stories are all human conditions, get passed on through our genome that allow us to survive extraordinary circumstances, we all therefore must have an ability to access that information when we need it. And that's what good dissociation can do. We all have moments in our life where we have taken on a different role than we typically do, and we thrive in it because we had to. And that's the whole theme of this movie we see over and over. So dissociation isn't just those moments where you have to check out because it's so awful. It's also the points in time where your brain says, we don't have time for anxiety right now. We don't have time for any of this bullshit. We don't have time for self-doubt. We don't have time for any of it. You got to go right now. You have to be on. You know, for any of us that have ever been actors or performers or musicians, when you get that moment on stage, you can't be the version of you that doubts yourself, that questions yourself, that asks, can I do this? You don't have space for that. Who do you have to be when you get on stage? You have to be the rock star. You have to be the actress. You have to be the funny guy. And you have to do it now. And these guys and these characters in this movie all had to be the warriors, the thieves, the sneaks, all of these things they had to take on immediately to survive. And they had access to it because of the good side effects of dissociation.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes it can help, like what we're saying, like with how it helps them become like warriors in just everyday life with things that can feel scary, just kind of putting it out of your head, thinking like, I'm not going to overthink it. I'm just going to say it, or I'm just going to do it, or I'm just going to do this, whatever that scary thing is, just kind of pushing all of those unhelpful thoughts and all of those anxieties and stuff aside.
Mm-hmm. Molly, you're an actress. You've had to do this.
Oh yeah, a lot. It's just like sometimes, and I totally get what you were saying about like the flow and stuff like that. Sometimes you're just up on stage and like, you just have to try and forget your lines. So that way you can actually say them and stuff like that.
You have to take on the experience of another person and be that. You can't just get up there and read lines, right? You can't memorize them and say them. You have to be that person. You have to feel that feeling.
And it has to feel like it's your true lived experience. And it also, you have to try and make, depending on how, like what medium you're doing today, you have to try and make the audience feel that way too. Like they're currently living it the same way that your character is and you are in that moment.
Mm-hmm. And to kind of bring it into like real world examples as well as like I've worked in settings, I think I've talked about in here, where things can get pretty elevated in terms of people can become unsafe and they can become unsafe towards themselves and towards others. And also part of being a therapist or working in mental health is you really have to figure out like what settings, like, and by that I mean like what levels of care you can handle for yourselves. And there's no like wrong answer to that. You really just have to figure out like where you can be. And I think where that flow state can come up as like a therapist, and this is interesting for anyone listening, is sometimes there is that kind of eerie calm that I know that can come over me in those moments when someone starts doing something really intense and aggressive. And I know that people have said to me, I feel like I'm bragging now, but like, wow, you're like so calm during that. Or you're so confident. And then it's like, yeah, I seem calm and confident. Now I'm about to go into my office and have like the shakes for like 10 minutes. And not because I'm scared necessarily, but because when you get out of that flow state, your body has to have time. That's why we talk about debriefing sometimes on this podcast. And we talk about like sort of like aftercare kind of things is even if your mind can kind of compartmentalize enough to get through that moment, your body will still remember, like we talk about your body keeps the score, like what happened energetically to you and relationally to you. And so, it just exactly what we've been saying, which is that it really can help you live through the moment, but that doesn't mean that there isn't like after effect to it as well that we have to be cognizant of. And I think especially when it comes into like a movie, sort of the cinematic world of like the Lord of the Rings, like we're talking about, is we don't give space to that after part. And so then we just carry it around, or kind of like I was saying with how I can appear in those moments myself is people assume that everybody else nailed it and isn't bothered. And we're all just like, and everyone else is crushing it. And they don't seem to be like impacted by that sword fight we just had or whatever. And so then we all internalize our individual experience thinking that it's just something's wrong with us. And so I think that is also the part of like recognizing that there is that after effect that can feel really isolating. But in fact, it's like most things, a universal experience that we need to create space for after those moments. I think we've all probably had experiences where something really wild happens, like a natural disaster or a car accident or something where in the moment, something within us just like pulls up and just we like are like warriors, like we've been talking about. And that doesn't hang out when we go home by ourselves or like when we're in the bathroom after the fact, like all of us comes back to us, and there needs to be a space for that.
Right. Because every single thing that goes into our body, be it physical or psychological, must be digested or processed in some way. Lotion that you rub on your skin must be absorbed. Food that you eat must be digested. Water that you drink must be processed. The same thing is true with memories and information that you take in. And that's where trauma processing becomes so important, is that when you're in these moments, the parts of you that were turned off still have to reckon with the information that was taken in when the threat stops existing. Mm-hmm. And that's, I think, something that people struggle with when explaining trauma, when treating trauma, when experiencing and then digesting trauma later, is that the recorders in your brain never turn off, ever, not ever. You digest and sort through every single stimuli that you encounter your entire life, including stuff that people have told you, including media that you consume, including experiences that you've had. You record, file, and process everything. Some of it becomes irrelevant. Your drive to work on Tuesday, June 17th of 2019 might not occur to you as anything, and it probably is one of 1,000 times that you've driven that road. You go like, okay, well, there's a stop sign in a road and there's probably traffic, and Chicago is going to Chicago, so I can expect that somebody drove too fast and somebody drove too slow, blah, blah, blah. You have no emotional reaction to it. But the things that you record, even when you're in a dissociated state, whether you were in a survival dissociated state where you had to escape and do things you wouldn't normally do that were aggressive or submissive or running, you still recorded those. And when the full parts of you kick back on, AKA when you allow yourself to stop having your amygdala run the show and stop being in reactionary mode and enter into the normal processing that exists in your medial frontal cortex, where the part of you that's human and can process complex data and decision making and foresight, insight, etc., lives. You get out of survival mode. Once that other part of your brain kicks back on, which they can't function at the same time, is you have to now reckon with all that data you took in. And that's exactly what Brittany's talking about. That moment where you step up to the bully, you eliminate the threat, you deal with a situation, you play a role you would never play, but the situation demanded it. Later, when you get by yourself and get out of the threat mode, you have to digest what just happened and break down that, holy shit, I could have just died there. That bully could have kicked me in the face and kicked me downstairs. But that's not what happened. But you still have to reckon with all that later. And I think that's some of the things that we start to see in Frodo when Frodo dissociates out of these situations, which is done with the metaphor of the ring in this, where he pulls out and then he's processing all of the things that could happen. And this movie just does a brilliant job of showing us both sides of dissociation, good and bad.
Mm-hmm. Well, we can shift into our last topic, which we've kind of been touching upon here and there in our other discussion, is family dynamics and trauma bonds. And like we've been talking about, like when we talk about it in Captain America, Civil War, is this idea of which a lot of movies do, which is like found family too dynamics and how we see that. So first, let's take a break and then we'll get into it. All right. So I'm going to put you on the spot, Molly. I know this was something that interested in you. So what came up for you with family dynamics and trauma bonds? You can go wherever you'd like with it.
All right. Yeah. Well, like you said, we had already kind of touched on this a little bit, especially like on the trauma bond part of it. But with family dynamics, I really want to talk about the fact that every single like pairing of people, since there are 9, has like a completely different relationship. And like how we see like with Legolas and Gimli, how it's so tense, and how like because they have the tensions of being an elf and a dwarf, and how we have with Gandalf kind of how everyone is looking at him as the patriarch and as like the leader of their group almost, and then how that shifts later with seeing Aragorn more as the leader, and even Frodo at times, since he is the one with the ring, but how that respect isn't necessarily there because he is younger. And that can happen in real life families that are actually related, where it can be someone still like can have power in a situation, but because they are like a younger sibling or something, it doesn't get recognized as much.
Yeah, and I feel like in terms of and also, which is kind of what you already said, Molly, is just how different those dynamics can be based on what the situation is or who's missing at the table. Mm-hmm. Like in terms of Gandalf is gone. Now we're looking to Aragorn, but then we got split up because blah, blah, blah happened, and everybody kind of having to, I think everyone also having to be a little bit flexible about what their role could be, and kind of understanding that now that there's been this traumatic event, for lack of a better way to say it, in terms of watching Gandalf die, or what they perceive him as being dead, that then they all kind of have to figure out, well, where am I now? And we talk a lot about, one of the things I talk a lot about, and we talk a lot about on the podcast in general, is just how the roles in a family are so that everybody has a role, and that those roles all work together, whether or not that is for a dysfunctional relationship or dysfunctional dynamic, or for a healthy dynamic. That there's always roles are always involved, and roles and identity have, they a lot of times they go hand in hand, or at least we make the assumption that they do, which is why they can be confusing sometimes, because sometimes they don't match. And that how it's something that almost happens unconsciously in some ways, where it isn't, especially if we talk about kind of going back to some of when we were talking about in the beginning in terms of children experiencing trauma, where that can have children who experience trauma can have to play several different kinds of roles, and that those roles, and that if they try to change it, the system falls apart. But sometimes it falls apart, and sometimes what it does is puts a lot of pressure on that person to come back into their role. Like, this dynamic no longer works unless you're being this person. And so sometimes, especially we see that in where there has been a lot of trauma in the family, that can be something that happens. But that I think that even just seeing that the dynamic shift in this comes from a traumatic event, because that's usually what people having to change their roles or change the dynamic, that can be a really big piece of it. And how another big piece of that, in terms of going back kind of to some of the other things I've said earlier on the podcast today, the episode today, is how that connects back to, nope, no idea what I was talking about. Cool. I'll think about
when
it.
That happens.
My brain just out to lunch.
Just sometimes it's just gone. I get it.
Yeah.
We need to get a lasso for that when it does that, just to nope, bring it back in.
Mm-hmm.
Nope. I have absolutely no idea what I was going to say. I think only just that kind of in general, like family dynamics are a thing, whether or not it's something that you're aware of. playing different roles is so that the system can come to a specific outcome, or so that everyone can be successful, or however we want to look at it. That's what the system thinks it's doing. What's hard about a system that is set up based on trauma or intergenerational trauma is that those roles have been maybe misplaced, or too much support has been put on one person, or this person has had to do this for a certain amount of time. And sometimes that can stunt the growth of the other people in the system. And that's kind of why in this situation, why we see each one of them having to kind of take a different, kind of stand up in a different way. And how that can happen in families in terms of, like when the oldest sibling leaves the family, and then everything kind of has to shake back into whatever that's going to be. And then the next sibling leaves the family. And how that always shifts and change, and how sometimes the dynamic in the system doesn't know how to deal with it. And it kind of can make things a lot more complicated.
Mm-hmm. Right. And not only is there this dynamic within family systems in the external with all of the roles of the people that exist in a family, but the same struggle exists within the internal family system that happens within us, where all of the parts that exist in us, all the different roles and aspects of our personality that exist, also get into conflict with each other and get challenged when their roles are required to change, or one role steps into the forefront and another one steps down, therefore changing the system and the way it functions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I would say too, another thing about trauma bonds, I don't think we really see in this movie, unless I'm not remembering something, which could be very true, is trauma bonds can also create, I don't know if I want to put it like this, but sort of like the only way I can think of it is like false intimacy almost. Or, well, everyone's nodding, so I guess I'm onto something in the Zoom call. But and I think, you know what's making me think of? The movie Speed, and how at the end of Speed, Sandra Bullock says to Keanu Reeves, my therapist says that you shouldn't, if you meet someone in a dangerous circumstance, it's not going to be a good relationship, which actually is a very woke statement and very mindful statement, which is the idea of when you go something really hard together, does that mean that your relationship with that person is toxic inherently and you guys can't be a good relationship and yada, yada? No, that doesn't mean that. And you have to be mindful of, are we hooked in together because something really hard happened to both of us? But that doesn't mean that this relationship, we should be bonded to each other like we feel like we should be. And so it is that thing of being mindful of how this relationship began. And then what is this relationship still feeling like and looking like? Because as we've talked about with the family dynamics pieces, is how you can lose yourself within that relationship when it is bonded through trauma or hardship. And are we our best versions of ourselves in these relationships? And it's so hard to not be so dialed in to a relationship in which you feel like this other person knows exactly what it was like when we went through this thing together. And so I know we don't really see that in this movie that I'm aware of, maybe in the other three that I could not tell you what happens for the life of me.
You see at the end of the third one.
Okay. Well, you can fill in the gaps for me, but is that being mindful of, is this just a trauma bond, or is there a fruitful relationship that a trauma bond can be somewhat within?
Well, and the way to really dive into what you're saying and make it a concrete example for people is think about the ridiculous decisions that we make for work friends sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
We'll stay on this job together and we'll keep dealing with this together, or we'll all leave together, or we are all going through this thing together. And then look how fast those friendships stop existing when the work bond stops. You were willing to ride or die with this person and they could not give a shit to call you ever again when you both or one leaves that job.
Well, because you have situational relationships where
Right.
where you're bonded because you're in a particular situation, but you're not actually bonded. And with the trauma bond, one of the ways it can be really dysfunctional in forming a relationship in that is that if one of you is trying to heal and the other one is going, I don't want to pay attention to this. I don't want to talk about this. I don't want to face this. And the other one's going, I can't live like this for the rest of my life. I don't want to carry this. And it can be really hard to grow and heal if the other person isn't at the same place as you. And so that can be really challenging.
Well, and what you just described is that a system that has one part of it is going to change, the other parts of the system, be it internal or external systems, will try to drag that other part back into homeostasis with it because it's not ready to change.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Hannah. Sorry.
And not because the other people in the system are evil, horrible people. It's because they have also been conditioned by, since we've been talking about intergenerational trauma, they have been conditioned by the intergenerational trauma to expect these kinds of relationships. And so they also only feel connected to other people when they experience something very intense like this. And that's how they begin to identify what connection and love and how, whatever the fuck we want to call it, that's how we start to identify that. And if it happens enough times over our life, it can be really hard and a really big shift to have to relearn how to do that. And I feel like, Martha, I was thinking about in your example of even, again, like being in a family system where one person out of the however many people were involved in the system to begin with decides that they're in a different place. And people aren't ready to accept that, or it's not safe for you to share that that's what you're doing because the system can come up against it so hard. And how really healing traumas and experiences can be something that you have to do away from people. And that is a part of, and that's a part of what makes healing trauma such a courageous experience that I don't think. Go ahead, Martha.
Oh no, I didn't mean to interrupt. I thought you had stopped. So no, go ahead.
No, I was done. So go ahead.
Oh, all right. I was just going to say, like, that's like why I did my project, because my family dynamic was you don't tell. And I was screaming my entire life going, this is wrong. Like, this is horrifying. And I've always felt like I was screaming and no one could hear me. And so I knew that by the end of that list, one of the things was going to have to be that I shared that list. And so that was number 50, and so I was like, oh my God, I have to actually put this out. And then I have to deal with the fallout, but I had already left the family. I had already, but that doesn't mean they're not still here, and there's a hell of a lot of them. Cause there's like 48 of them, but
there's so many.
I had to leave this, I had to leave a lot. But yeah, it was very much that, that need to break the system. I had to say this, your rules are insane. This whole thing was completely insane, and I am not going to play this game anymore. And so I did it very publicly, but that's also why the other part is behind a paywall, because I was like, I'm not putting this public, I'm not putting all the nitty gritty public, because I wanted to be respectful, because I'm not the only party in this thing. But at the same time, it was very much you have to leave and you have to decide what it is that needs to be broken in order for you to heal.
Absolutely. And that it can be, and that having that experience and it can be tricky and ongoing. Like, I think one of the things that we don't talk about, and I know we kind of talked about boundaries a little bit, but in terms of when we start creating boundaries for ourselves, in terms of being in a dysfunctional family system or dysfunctional relationship, whatever however you want to say it, is that we still want those relationships. Sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes we still want, our body has created, our thought process and our brain has created this connection that I only feel like this in this situation, or I only know how to understand meaning and connection through this one way. And it's really hard to be like, okay, so now this isn't good for me. So now I know that. And also they're still like knocking on the door. And sometimes I just want to be like, you know what? Fuck it. Yeah, let's just come in, because I'm sick of holding, when they come to brace the door the gate in the second movie, it's like, so it really is a courageous act that I think people don't quite understand. And hopefully at some point there'll be a better understanding of the impact of intergenerational trauma, the impact of how those cycles get broken, and how those cycles get broken by one person deciding or having the capacity to, or whatever we want to say happens, because it's different for everybody, that they don't want to have to live in this reality that they have been exposed to for such a long time, and they have some awareness that they may not have to.
And then we see that with Frodo. As Frodo starts to break away from the bonds and the inner relationships that exist within the fellowship, Frodo starts to sever those and starts to change. And then they try to pull him back in. Merry and Pippin try to pull him back in. You see that symbolic break where they're going, come hide with us here, hide with us here. And then, Pippin looks at him and goes, he's leaving.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He's leaving.
I loved that scene. And I loved that moment when he realized, he's like, oh, you're leaving, aren't you? Oh, you're really not, there's nothing left, and he knew there was not going to be any talking him into staying. Like, this was a different Frodo than the one they started out, Yeah.
Well,
and I loved too that there wasn't even any words spoken, any indication that he was leaving, other than the fact that he didn't cross over and sit with them there. And I loved that they just knew it, because as we were saying, they have this bond. And at least in this version that's not extended, we don't really know what their relationship was like in the Shire.
They're cousins.
But just from looking
they're cousins.
At the movie, you can still see how it really is so strong there, even just at that one moment.
I was extremely happy to see that they respected his boundary there, and they just kind of let him go. Because that's not, what we usually see. It's like, oh, let me convince you. Let me tell you all the ways that you are an idiot and you're wrong and that you need us and that, and whatever. And they just kind of went, oh, yeah, he's okay. You're leaving. Oh, it's like that's,
Well, that even played out in the next scene when Aragorn is like, you had Legolas and Gimli are like, oh, they just crossed, we can go. And Aragorn's just like, yeah, no. And I love how they didn't fight it. They knew it too. It was like, oh yeah, now what do we do?
And I love that they went to go and rescue Merry and Pippin, because when it comes down to it, they are still a fellowship and they still have to have every party member to make this work, even if they aren't all together at all times.
Absolutely. Right, and Rob, when you were bringing up Aragorn, I thought it was going to go with the other scene where Aragorn and Frodo have their break too, where Aragorn has to struggle with himself, with the ring pulling at him, and with the recognition that he too is a victim to this thing and that he can't resist it either. When Frodo asks him, can you trust yourself?
Yeah.
And all of them realize at the same point, like the evil that this ring is and the power that it carries.
Yeah, which Frodo wouldn't have realized until he had the experience with Boromir. Of, oh, this is like, they can't handle this. Like they can't, there's no way for them to get around this. And we see him kind of just realize that this is not this is not me. This is, the ring does this to everybody. And I want to, and I now know that and understand that. So I need to ask you, are you sure that you really could do that? Because so far, nobody else has really been able to.
Nobody. And like those scenes right there illustrate so much of this point. And they also illustrate so much of why Bruce Wayne.
I knew it. I can tell by the look on your Batman. Stupid face when you're about to fucking talk about Batman. Go ahead.
Oh my God.
I'm going to do it. And it's going to be epic. Best one I've done.
Go ahead.
No, the Lego character?
Get out, Brittany. But
the Lego character Batman?
I'm going to mute you. But the watching Frodo come to this realization that other people are going to be corrupted by this and that I'm the only one who can assume this mantle is why Batman doesn't do the things that we all want him to do. Why in the real version of Batman, where we go like, why is this billionaire not providing these resources that could help turn around the city, is because he's the only one that's incorruptible enough that he can use the resources to go after those true evils. And the socioeconomic issues that can be argued with him are still there, and I acknowledge them, but that identity that he must assume of being the only one that's incorruptible is the mantle that both Batman and Frodo have to take on in order to play their roles in these stories and overcome the one thing that represents the ring, which is the power lust and greed that corrupts all men. And that's the thing that Batman stands as a symbol against, and also what Frodo is a symbol against in this story. And we see that become this thing that Frodo realizes at this moment as he fractures the family, that this system, because of the evil of this ring, because of this greed, because of this power lust, is going to continue to lie to these people, and it's going to become insurmountable. And I'm the only one who is not corruptible by it. And I have to assume this mantle. And we see him realize that in that beautiful scene where you see Elijah Wood holding out that ring at the mouth of that river or at the banks of the river before he realizes that he has to get in that boat and he has to go.
But I also
the hubris, though.
Yeah, agreed.
The hubris, because you know who's not corruptible? My boy Samwise Gamgee.
Nope, it gets Sam too later.
I choose to not believe that. I mean,
No,
Batman eats a
doesn't.
lot
I
of
don't agree
lobster
with that.
thermidor.
Yes,
Batman eats a lot of
Carry the
lobster
load.
thermidor for someone
Yes, it
who
does.
is not aware of money.
Well, and I'm also
Sam's commitment to Frodo is incorruptible, but Sam is also susceptible to the evils of the ring because he offers to carry it for a while. And that
Isn't there a degree of ego with Batman, though, that isn't there with Frodo? Frodo isn't doing it out of ego, but Batman definitely, I'm the one who's best at this. It plays out over and over with Batman. Yes.
Oh, we could go on a whole tear. We could go on a whole tear about Batman.
No, I'm not worried about that. But I because I think they are very different, both characters. But I do see what you're saying, Ben. That yes, they have that responsibility, so they both step up to the plate. But Bruce Wayne has a degree of ego in it, even if he doesn't start out that way. By the end, he totally does. Come on. When he sits in the God chair, Bruce does.
Bruce does. Bruce and Frodo definitely don't have the same ego-driven response.
This is what happens when you shoehorn Bruce Wayne into every episode of this podcast.
And what I was going to say,
get Rob on who can challenge you.
Oh my goodness.
What I was going to.
That sounded like a fruitful discussion we should have later.
Yeah.
Yes, Hannah?
Not likely.
Oh, we sit through the extended editions.
What I was going to say is that isn't that at the same time?
10 points to Rob. 10 points to House Southgate.
Go ahead, Hannah.
Is that aren't these both characters who are having a trauma response in terms of this being something that they are the only ones who can be responsible for? Isn't that something that we see with anybody who experiences a major big T trauma, as we talk about, where, you know, I'm the only one who can do this, or I'm the only one who can protect everyone, or I'm the one who has to figure it out. So I think that in that case, you know, yeah, I guess maybe, but Bruce Wayne is still a super rich white man that could just use his money and shut his fucking mouth and quit dressing like a bat.
I mean,
Speaking
I think
of
it is
white men.
Yeah.
This was the whitest movie.
Oh my
I know.
goodness.
I know.
There
I was
was
thinking
not-
about
they're
that
all
today.
very white.
Color.
There were I was looking at the cast list to like remember all the characters' names and stuff like that. And I was scrolling through and I was like, it was all white. And I kept scrolling and it was just still white. And this was like for all of the movies. And I was like,
I mean, we're
it's-
talking about like mythical creatures and fairies and elves and shit. They all have to be white people.
Apparently.
Yeah, only Lurtz, I think, was Lurtz and Sauron were played by actors who were indigenous to the
New Zealand.
New Zealand, yes, they're New Zealanders. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
But
and
yeah, other
Sauron
than
is
that,
like
is
a
definitely
floating
white.
eye.
Yeah, he's not even.
He doesn't count.
Well, the one in the armor,
Diverse.
the one in the armor. But yeah, no,
Yeah,
it's like
gotcha.
the whitest movie ever. Yeah, no doubt.
Really
It was
is.
kind
And
of
there were what,
shocking.
2 women?
There are
Two. Yep.
two.
Yeah.
And one of them they had to add to it because I believe in the books that R1 doesn't even show up until Two Towers.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
That scene doesn't even happen until Two Towers, I don't think.
No, I think you're right.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Yeah.
Since we have a varied expertise on here, and this is a story that is only the first of 3 parts, we're gonna jump over treatment and we're gonna land in final thoughts.
And we'll cover treatment and when we do Return of the King, which I assure you all we will do.
All right, I will prepare myself mentally and emotionally.
Let's take a quick break here for 5 seconds. And jump into final thoughts.
Should I go first since I'm going to be contrary?
You opened your presence on this particular episode professing your ignorance. So yes, I'm just kidding.
Like I said with Empire Strikes Back, I respect and acknowledge that this movie is beloved and that some things just aren't for me. And that's okay. Guys, it's
That is okay.
if something's not for you.
That's okay.
Even if it's routinely beloved. Something about this movie, when it hits my rods and my cones, just does not go into my brain. And I'm someone who I read high concept, fantastical shit. I've read all the Game of Thrones books, which are so meaty, and I eat up everything, like in terms of stories. And something about this movie, my eyes like glaze over. I'm not retaining. I don't know if it's because it's so dark and all the colors seem like they're one color. I don't know what's happening, but like the fight scenes, it's like I zone out, talk about dissociating. And then I come back and I'm like, I am not paying attention to no one's names. I don't know who's fighting who. They were at this one place and now there's this other place. And I got to talk about this movie in like 2 days. So I hope I pulled it off. I will definitely do the other 2 because I respect fandom. And I will probably only watch this movie again if I have to professionally, or if Hannah forces me to, because these are her favorite movies. This is probably like the 3rd time I saw this movie. I saw it in theaters actually in high school when it first came out. And I saw it recently. Well, I saw it once in college. Maybe it's the 4th time. And then I saw it recently because Hannah wanted to watch all 3 movies over the pandemic quarantine. And I had seen the first one and the 3rd one and hadn't seen the middle one like for years and years. And I used to like to pretend that I didn't even know what Lord of the Rings was. That was kind of my shtick. So now I can't pretend that anymore. I have to know that I've seen them, though I could not tell you a single thing. Well, I guess I could tell you some things. I did that dope opener, but that's about it. So I will throw to whoever wants to pick up after me.
I think I should probably go next because I'm along those same lines.
We're gonna go up the ladder of intensity of fandom.
Yeah, it helped having people sitting with me that could explain it because I had none of it. I did not know what the heck was going on at many of the points, and so I was just kind of sitting there going, what? Yeah, I don't know. And but once again, the artistically, visually stunning. You know, I'm assuming it was well written if I could understand what they were saying.
No doubt.
But it was, but I think, yeah, visually it was stunning. It was well acted, if not long-winded. And
girl, you're telling me. I even read this book in high school and I was like, never again. It took me forever to get through this book in high school.
There's a lot
Molly
of
said,
descriptions
if
of
you
grass.
think the movie's long-winded.
I was like, I can't hear about these people eating another meal. What are we doing?
Oh, no,
the
that
world building
part I
is eating
like.
itself.
Let's talk about 11Zs. I want to talk about the food. Yeah.
Fuck yeah.
No, yeah, it's just,
Potatoes.
yeah, it's there. Okay. So there you go.
All right, so I'll go next if we're going up the level of intensity. I had seen this movie before and I retained none of it. I actually didn't think that I finished it. I thought I only watched the first half or the first quarter even. And as I was watching this going, wait a minute, I remember all of this. I just spaced on it. So rewatching it, I feel like was very rewarding. And I think that it just made me love it more. I loved it the first time I watched it too. It's just something that's so magical. And even though I didn't really watch these movies when I was very young, I've always grown up around a lot of people who have. And so just watching it and kind of being immersed in that world feels very nostalgic for me. And this was such a fun one to talk about. And I like what Mom was just saying about how it's visually stunning. I loved the acting. I loved how it was written. It was just overall just a great movie, if not a little bit long.
Yeah, agreed.
I take it I'm the next level of intensity, or is
No,
Ben? Because
probably
might be
me.
the top, Rob.
I think between me, you, and Hannah, we could
I'm-
probably debate that for hours.
I think I'm probably next. I would guess because I think you have a lot more knowledge, Rob, than I do of the whole deal. So, yeah, I've loved. I tried to read Lord of the Rings. I don't know, 20 times when I was younger, and hated every second of it, and never even got through the first book because it was it's kind of like reading another language in the beginning, in terms of kind of understanding it, which I'm sure is the point or whatever. But I love the movies. I've always loved the movies. I think I saw all of them in the movie theater. And then I was very naively very excited about the Hobbit movie and thought that it would only be one. And I was so excited. It's only going to be one film. And then, my spirit was crushed when I learned that there were two more movies that you would still have to watch in order to get the whole story. But I love these movies. I love the characters. I love Samwise. And I love Arwen. I love all of the, as much as the women aren't highlighted in terms of having roles that are more significant than any of the men, in any way, shape, or form, to be perfectly honest. The ones that are there are powerful in their own way and are very respected by the other people that are around them. And so I think that's something that I always enjoyed watching. But there's some of my favorite movies. I watch these movies a couple times a year, usually. I'll just decide that it's time for me to watch them. And I usually watch them in the fall, so this was perfect. And Brittany will absolutely be watching these more, just so you know, because I will be
You
forcing
better
her
make it
to.
into a drinking game or something.
That's fine. That's fine.
Keep my attention.
I'll sit on the
up.
other side of her and we'll just keep her awake by slapping her repeatedly.
Like flick my ears.
But I really love it. And as somebody who is a trauma survivor, some of these pieces and some of the hope and the way that the hope is described and the way that the hope is that they use it feels very real and helpful at different times. So yeah, I love these movies. I'll watch them forever.
I think it's Ben. I want to give Rob the crown.
I feel similarly.
Wow.
I mean, I think Rob can probably out nerd me here. So that, that's.
If you're talking about the Silmarillion or whatever, then.
I mean,
I've got that on my
top
shelf.
decks.
I mean, right. Don't make mistakes here. Now, I wrote a paper on Lord of the Rings and Silmarillion and Hobbit in high school and then expanded on it in college. But
oh God.
Yes. Anyway,
You've out nerded me, Ben.
So cool, Ben.
Oh,
so cool.
One ring.
See, you guys how do you guys make this mistake still that you underestimated my nerdiness?
I mean, I guess I just thought it was like your heart belongs so strongly to Star Wars or Batman. I guess you got that throuple. So I didn't realize.
Oh, you did not. But anywho, no, Lord of the Rings was before all of those. Honestly, I loved these movies. I still love them. I remember my reaction and sitting with my friends. I don't remember what movie we went to see, but maybe Minority Report when this trailer for this dropped. And my friend and I had, we used to sit and watch the Hobbit cartoon. My parents read me the Hobbit as a kid. Like, it's one of the fondest memories I have of those, the story reading days was when my dad would read me the Hobbit. And I love this universe. And these movies did such a brilliant job of taking us away, filming in New Zealand, a place where most of us are never going to get to see because it's so far away from everything, but so untouched in many ways. Really whisked us away to a world that we couldn't possibly imagine. But then because Tolkien was such a professor at his core, he was a professor of Norse languages. He developed an entire world for us to be thrust into. And he tied in all of his experiences from World War I into this story and all that he learned about human nature and hope and what it takes to survive and who can and who can't. And you just see that become this timeless epic. And I love this movie and I love the other ones, the Hobbit movies. I like the cartoon. But this story is such a fantastic examination of the human spirit and the way that we can grow and change and adapt to the things that we are presented with and rise above them. And that quote from Gandalf or the conversation between Gandalf and Frodo about, I wish this didn't happen in my time. And he says that all people who encounter such things wish that it doesn't happen in their times, that all we can do is make what we can out of the time that's given to us. And as a therapist, especially one that focuses on trauma, that message alone helps me communicate to clients over and over again that trauma is a universal experience that no one escapes. No one escapes pain. No one escapes suffering. And that all of us wish that we lived through times that were easy. But the reality is no times are easy and no one has an easy experience. And this story does a beautiful job of tapping in to showing us the growth in every one of these characters. We see all of these arcs develop. We see all of these things grow and all of these characters grow and change and become actualized versions of themselves and take on roles that they didn't expect and didn't know that they had and run counter to who they thought they were and were taught to be and make something beautiful out of it together. And I love this film.
All righty. Rob, take us home.
All right. Well, I don't know if I'm going to out nerd you, but my history with it is longer. I remember for me, my first encounter with it was the Hobbit animated film, seeing it in the theater, I believe. I was so young that it was either in the theater or it was on TV, but I was enamored. And I remember my for Christmas that year, and I was pretty young, my grandparents' friend who would buy me a Christmas gift bought me, there was like an oversized Hobbit book that had the illustrations from the animated film. And I was obsessed with this. On other things, I've talked about how one of the early things that I had that kind of shaped who I am, my nerdiness, was getting the Marvel comics, the Bring on the Bad Guys and Sons of Origins and Marvel Origins, and how it had these great things by Stan Lee in it. And I talk about how, like, I'd read this and it ignited my imagination. What I haven't talked about a lot is how this Hobbit thing actually ignited it before that. I was completely into it. It wasn't like I was obsessed and I thought about it and talked about it all the time. Mm-hmm. But yeah, anytime the topic came up, I'd go deep. And Lord of the Rings, when I hit that one, it was junior high, and I kept talking about how much I enjoyed this stuff. And my mom and dad bought me the paperbacks of the three. And I remember going to 7th grade and being that little nerd kid that was getting picked on because he liked Star Trek and all that other crap. Mm-hmm. And here I am walking around with my Lord of the Rings book, and I'm like, just try me. Because this is the most awesome book I've ever read. Hannah, I'm sorry you didn't get into it. It's the most awesome book you're ever going to read. And you can't just read the first one. You get to the second one, you're like, oh shit, this is amazing. And I deep. Oh my God. And I was even into then the Ralph Bakshi version, which was supposed to be a trilogy of animated films, and they lost the funding. So they did one film and kind of shoved the ending onto it. And I still think it's cool as hell. I still like that. I even like the song from The Hobbit, the one that Bilbo sings. Gotta love all of it. When these movies came out, like Martha said, we went to see, I think it was opening weekend, the first one. I was a puddle. She was having trouble connecting with it. And I knew, I'm like, this is not her thing, but she's there with me, my sweetie's here. And I went into another world from the first second. When it just came up, I'm like, that's it. And it hit every note. And I knew where things were different from the books. I knew, like, people are going to be online or, complaining about this and that. I'm like, screw all of you. This was perfect. And I still feel that way. In fact, one more quick thing, and I think I mentioned it before we jumped on, when we had a retail store and we would work these crazy hours every day, and it would be 11 o'clock at night. We're finally, okay, we can go to bed. And, all you did was work. And you're like, I got to turn on the TV. I don't care what's on, just something. And damn it, Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Rings was on every night for like 3 months. If it was midway through, thank God, I'd get to bed after an hour and a half. If it wasn't, I would be up 3 hours later watching the credits going, oh God, I got to be up in 3 hours. But, I can't stop. I couldn't stop. I love it so, so very much. When you know it that well, you see it in everything. Mm-hmm. You see it in every story. Harry Potter, great, fun, rip off. Shannara, I'm reading Shannara right now. Love it, rip off. Not in a bad way. I love it. But you want to talk about the hero's journey? This is, they talk about like, that's the story. And everyone tells that story again and again.
Right, the monument.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. They tell this story. This one got it right. And they tell this story over and over and over again. And a lot of them fall short of this, because this is the most astounding piece of work, in my opinion. There you go. Nerd out.
All right. Well, we'll leave it there. So if you guys just want to let people know where they can find you guys one more time, the Southgates.
Who wants to go first?
I can go first.
Do it, Mal.
All right. Once again, my name is Molly Southgate. You can find my podcast, Read Between the Lines, a book podcast on pretty much everything. And you can find me on Instagram as Molly_Southgate and my podcast Instagram as Read Between the Lines podcast.
Great.
I am Martha Southgate, and you can find me. You can find my podcast, Broken to Brave, somewhere. Don't know where. Just Google it, I guess.
On everything. Same thing as Redeeming Alliance and this show. It's on all the stuff.
And then our Patreon show is Broken to Brave, and that's
on Patreon.
Why do I even bother? Like, I am the most unprofessional podcaster. Just tell them where to find me.
Just with the plugging. You're very professional otherwise.
Okay.
Yeah.
You got a shameless self-promotion.
You know, she has trouble with that. So whenever I start in, I'm a plug machine. I mean, I could go for the next hour if you'd like. And then there's an extended edition of it where I can go further.
Please, no.
And there's the callback.
But yeah, Martha, she can barely get through it. At the end of our shows at the beginning, this is a little aside, when we had our first shows, we'd get to the end and I had to plug our Twitter and our Facebook and our email. And she, by the third thing, is sitting there like,
No.
Get it over with. I'm like, I have to say these three things.
Record something so that I wouldn't have to sit through it. But anyway, go ahead, Rob. Do it quick.
Okay, so you can still find Southgate Media Group on Twitter. It's at SMG Pods. On Facebook, it's under Southgate Media Group. On Instagram, it's at SMG Pods. You can find me at R Southgate on Twitter and at Rob Southgate. I know there's no at, but it's easy. On Instagram. Those are probably the best ways to follow us on all the various projects and things we're doing. I mean, yeah, we could talk about all the podcasts. We could talk about the books. We could talk about the live events. We could talk about the consulting. I mean, it just goes on and on and on, mainly because I got to get it all out. And Martha was sick of hearing me talk about Star Wars and Lord of the Rings and Spider-Man and Batman. That's how it all exploded. So
here I am.
Yet here she is. And my favorite show I do is the one where we talk about
Rob stole your bishwap.
So there you go. And I'm ready for some lambus bread. I don't know about you guys, but
I'm definitely
hungry.
Ready for lambus bread. I think the only thing that I want to say that I haven't said yet thus far is that if you guys haven't watched the special features and don't understand what the reference to "he took my bishwap" means, you are missing out.
No idea.
I think I'm good. I don't think I'm ever going to do that, man.
You're missing out. Hearing them talk about how frustrated that the characters would get. They hit one of the guys, the little people that played the long shot versions of Gimli or one of the hobbits was a chess master, and Sean Astin figured himself a chess master, and he would just like continually troll him about chess and cooking. And it's glorious. You guys got to watch those special features.
It's a super good story. I'll definitely.
It only had 17 hours to the extended edition.
Oh my God.
Okay.
We have to say extended edition at least.
That has got to break the Geneva Conventions or something.
Yeah.
All right. So, so the Southgates, thank you for joining us. As Ben said in the beginning, you guys were one of the biggest, if not the biggest, supports when we first started out as little baby podcasters. I'll plug us. You can find us at Twitter at popcorn_psych. You can find us at Facebook and Instagram at popcorn psychology and TikTok, though I am not good at it. And if you want to email us, you can find us at popcornpsychology@gmail.com. That's the best way to give us any thoughts, reflections, movie recommendations you have for us. And we also have a Patreon, which we do a bad job of plugging. So we also have a Patreon if you want to be a patron of us. And we have a TeePublic account. If you want to get any merch from us, we got mugs, we got stickers, we got
T-shirts, hoodies,
T-shirts,
masks.
I've got my T-shirt right next to me somewhere in here. I can't grab it, but it's there.
It now comes in many, many colors.
Yes, it does. Oh, yeah, we have a lot of colors now if you want to branch out from our black and red. So
I
you all for
particularly enjoy the
listening.
Joker variant, will be green and purple.
So thank you all for listening. Thank you, Southgates, for joining us, and we will see y'all next time.